I want to dive into some of these audience questions because there's a lot coming in and they're all really good. I saw one come in from Moses and Mark. I think we could direct this to you. You were talking about that whole 200 liter versus 100 liter bag. Moses asks, what is the optimal approach to harmonizing based on the example you just brought up, using a bigger 200 liter bag for 100 liter from the same manufacturer in the case of an emergency? Should we pursue global consensus standards through ASTM, a bunch of acronyms I won't list off, or would it be more effective to begin with regional harmonization with industry leaders before taking a global approach? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I've been involved in a bunch of false start discussions in the industry, different groups about how to agree broadly, and it hasn't been successful. I'm not pessimistic, but a different approach needs to be taken if it's going to be regional or industry wide. Where I've had the most success is within a company with some upper management support for, fixing this, I think was a quote I heard once, not making the tool more complicated than it needs to be. Single usability, reduce factory startup times, all this, but then the problems we've been discussing. So trying to structure an internal program and start standardization starts at home. I think is the best homely example here I have between 100 and 200 liter bags. What I had in my head is you have both of them already as qualified items in your inventory. You might not have them on your bill of materials, so you write some SOPs that allow you to make those substitutions on the fly. That said, there's also tying into that validation concern. If you're buying all of your bags, not all, but if you buy a set of bags from one supplier or a set of tubing assemblies from that same supplier, you should be able, in the context of your validation program, to say, and this covers all of these sizes. I'm going to validate the biggest one, and it covers smaller ones. I'm going to validate large and small and bridge in between. I think it's going to be a really hard-headed, quality organization that's going to make you do every single increment going up. Now, as a single-use engineer or a bioprocess engineer, it's your job then to explain why it's okay to cover 2 meters of silicone with a 3-meter validation, or whatever it is that you decide to do. So it's basically pre-validating, pre-qualifying, and in many cases doing more work. In fact, here, I'll just stop there. You will do more work than is necessary to do the first job with that single-use technology. It will pay off unless whatever you were doing with it is an absolute disaster and it doesn't go forward. Doubtful that that's going to happen. Unless your company goes out of business at that point, there's going to be some other project that's similar and you'll benefit. So yeah, I think you're going to pay a little more upfront in validation costs, qualification costs, but it's going to pay off.
Thank you, Mark.
I think, it's a phrase that's thrown around a lot, I should say, risk-based approach, right? So this applies to sort of all things. You focus energy and time and effort on the things that have the biggest consequence generally, right? You do an FMEA or whatever your risk assessment methodology is. And it can be applied in multiple aspects, right? For low risk applications where there are multiple clearance steps and everything else, a simple assessment of the vendor packages, typically 665 or BPOG extractables packages, an expert at assessing that data can declare them to be equivalent for low risk applications within. Mm-hmm. And so the validation effort is not significantly higher to cover low risk. You go to, let's say, a bulk drug substance bag, and now, the stakes are higher. The diligence required to declare equivalency would be much, much higher. And perhaps mitigating the risk of supply interruption is not dealt with by two sources, but by other means, right? So you then would move your efforts out of validation and into supply chain management or in inventory practices or in other aspects of mitigating the risks of supply interruption. So, I mean, I know I've got my ivory tower around here somewhere, but that risk-based approach isn't just the risk to, well, I guess in the end, it is the risk to the patient, because the risk of supply interruption or shorting the market is a risk that has to be dealt with.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Paul. Risk assessment and a careful consideration of the requirements is key here. There is a question in there, I think it's from Todd. Excellent question. If you look hard enough, sometimes I think he uses the word significant differences between seemingly equivalent pieces. And that's great, but significant is relative. So that's where I go back to requirements. What's the requirement? And if it's to grow a particular type of cell in a particular cell culture process, then yeah, some of these exotic extractables, and Amgen did a fabulous study in the early 2013 or so, showing that one brand of bags, their cells didn't grow well. Very nicely done. I think people kind of got spooked based on that and assumed that everything extractables related was going to be scary and they better know as much as possible. If you're pushing PBS buffer into flush system or something, your requirements are probably much less, but it depends. It depends on the requirements. So how do you declare things equivalent? How do you is based on, like Paul said, the risk, what could go wrong, and the requirements for the process.